This is number 15 of Psychic Warfare to Defeat Aging. And we're continuing from the last exciting episode where we talked about diet and the researchers in aging, foremost of which are David Sinclair from Harvard Medical School, talk about exercise and diet restriction as reducing aging, but the speed of aging, but not turning the clock back. And hearing him with Rhonda Patrick in his interview, which you can see on YouTube, which is so information dense, unless you're a chemist like me and Rhonda, you'll find it totally mind-blowing. One can see that biological systems are super complex, and it's not a simple machine. There's much more than a machine there. It's a gestalt. And what's good about David Sinclair from Harvard Medical School, the professor there, who is one of the foremost researchers on aging, is that he appreciates all of these biological systems can be distilled into information. And his theory is that aging is informational dysfunction, where the information that you were born with degrades over time. And all of the multiplicity of biological networks, which we'll go into, not in real depth because we need 1,000 videos, but you can scratch the surface of these processes, suffer from an underlying degradation of information, which can be seen as the root cause of aging. So when you're born, you have your genome, which comes from your mother and your father via meiosis, half from your mother, half from your father. And you've also got the epigenetic genome, which is how the blueprint is read. And this is passed from your parents. And modern research indicates that the epigenetic genome, the reading of the blueprint, degrades over time and causes aging. And Rhonda Patrick and David Sinclair were talking about the Havelock clock, which indicates how old you are. So you can actually get a test to indicate your biological age, which depends upon the number of methyl groups. Americans call it methyl, but remember they're Americans. Methyl, which are bonded to the cysteines in your DNA. There are 4 types of DNA: cysteine, adenine, guanine, and thymine. And these methyl groups lock out DNA so it can't be read. PGA islands condense the chromatin. DNA's 50% DNA and then 50% protein, and the protein shrouds the DNA so it can't be read. And your entire blueprint's the same, but after 100 cells, the blastocyst starts to get different methyl groups on different parts of the blastocyst to produce a zygote, to produce an embryo, so that even though they've got the same blueprint, they display different phenotypes. And that, as according to Sinclair, as aging goes on, this morphological differentiation breaks down, causing aging. So aging, according to Sinclair and his group from Harvard, is a breakdown of information, not a breakdown of DNA information, but a breakdown of epigenetic information, which is the reading of the DNA selectively, which is caused by epigenetic tags on the cysteines with methylation, or on the histones. I'm not going to go into that complexity at the moment, but simply put, you're reading information. Now, if you're reading information, it's quite simple for a polymath. I like physics because it's the basic science. That if you've got a blueprint which has all the multiplicities of what's in a human body, and we have a variety of cells which only display certain parts of the genome, the observer, the architect, has to use the master blueprint to build the building. But that's not it, is it? Because if you look at it quite simplistically, if you're building a building, the DNA is all the things available, while the building is selective parts of what's available to build a building. The bricks, the concrete, the rebar, the glass, and all the other stuff that goes into a skyscraper. So it's pretty obvious, even from that simple analogy, that the DNA blueprint is the available materials to build a building. But the blueprint of the building is something different, because we're taking bricks, concrete, rebar, glass, tiles, bathroom fittings, pipework, cabling, and all the other crap that goes into one of these big buildings from the DNA. But that doesn't build a building. We need the master blueprint for the building. which comes from the observer, this informational theory. And epigenetics is simply picking the bits, like a Lego, bits of Lego, to build a building. So we come to the revelation that DNA are the building blocks of the human body, but the architectural blueprint for the body resides elsewhere. And from cell biology, it's pretty obvious it's in epigenetics, where we just take bits from the blueprint for various cells to build the body. And the global structure for the epigenetic control comes from an overview of epigenetics, an epigenetic observer, which Sinclair is skirting around in his research. Now, from a physicist point of view, the human body is a field effect, and the basis of which is a quantum mechanical field. And this quantum mechanical field is collapsed by an observer using the Copenhagen interpretation, and physicists aren't in any way able to then link the quantum mechanical world to the real world, or the world of general relativity, by any means, methods, so that we've got two totally dysfunctional, proven theories in physics, quantum mechanics and general relativity. Now you might go, why is this guy wittering on about physics when he's talking about anti-aging? Well, the point is that DNA is not the blueprint of you. It's the blueprint of the building materials which are available to build you. And the blueprint to build you is which building materials are chosen per bit of you to build you. Like a Lego Snow White castle. Different blocks, different colours, here, blah, blah, blah. And the whole Lego catalogue, everything available in Lego, is the DNA blueprint. And as you can see, here we are, Lego catalogue, sticking up big, won't be quite huge because Lego's grown into a huge corporation. So, you know, fill the room up with Lego. Every single Lego available from Lego. That's your DNA blueprint. As you can see, it's quite obvious from that analogy that to build a human, you've got to have the blueprint for which Lego bricks you need to build your Lego human. And the mechanism to pick the Lego bricks and put them up is epigenetics. But that doesn't get us much further, because we need then another blueprint. The blueprint is when you get your Lego super kit. You've got this bunch of Lego bits, but you've got the blueprint, which bit goes where. DNA does not tell you which bit goes where. Epigenetics is the mechanism where you pick it out and put it in place. But the actual blueprint to build Snow White's castle, or whatever, and some great Lego kits, is not included in the paradigm of science at the moment. So what I'm postulating is that the blueprint for you resides in the quantum mechanical realm, and that then controls epigenetics, which then uses the DNA as the resource to build you. So let's go into how this might work. So in the quantum mechanical realm, we've got a wave and a particle. We bring in complex number theory, very simple complex number theory. We're not going into more difficult complex number theory like quaternions, octonions and sidonians. Simple complex number theory, Argand diagram, we've got I and minus I. So let's see if there is the Lego blueprint to build from your Lego blocks, which come from the DNA. The DNA builds the Lego blocks in my theory. Now, with Russian research, they found that the outside of the cell surface, produced bioplasm. The Russians called it bioplasm. They could stick a large electrostatic charge, 100,000 volts, couple of plates, put them at 100,000 volt potential. They could then use this to cause photon emission, which they could then pick up on photographic plates to produce something called Kirlian photography. And they found when you had a leaf, you can cut the leaf in half, whoosh. And after the leaf was cut in half, the bioplasm field of the leaf, which was cut away, was still there and died slowly over a period of days. Ostrand and Schroeder's books are brilliant introductions to this field. Similarly, they looked at the nucleus and they found another type of energy which they called soul fluid. This was from the Cold War, when they were desperately trying to work out the physics of psychic warfare, because he who controls psychic warfare controls the world. There was another field from the nucleus. Now, as a scientist who specialises in psychic warfare, this is interesting because it then gives us a way into finding the blueprint that uses the epigenetic mechanisms to get the building blocks from the DNA to build organisms. So let's go into more of the detail. So think of every human as being a quantum mechanical wave function, which no physicist on the planet would disagree with. Standard physics. Proven. We're all quantum mechanical wave functions. The problem is we've got no way as a physicist to connect the quantum mechanical wave function or the total state function of a human with its representation in the real world as described by standard physics, general relativity, and all the macro equations of physics. Totally disparate. Now, of course, if we could find a way of linking the total quantum wave function of humans with their macroscopic physical equations, we would then, of course, win a Nobel Prize, because that is the holy grail of physics. Let's look at, let's go back in time, because we've now got string theory and M theory and dark matter, and they are overly complicated. Let's go back to the start of the 20th century. We had quantum mechanics. Then Einstein came up with general relativity, and then Theodore Kaluza in 1926 came up with general relativity in 5 dimensions, where he linked electromagnetism with general relativity, which general relativity for the layman is space-time is warped by mass. Mass causes space-time to warp, rather like a rubber sheet, so that things spiral down, which then gives us our gravity well. Now, if one thinks that each biological system is a total quantum wave function, this then, of course, would give us our blueprint for the epigenetics, which is the workers who build the building from the basic building blocks available from our DNA. The architect would reside in the total quantum wave function. Now, as I've shown, quantum mechanics is a duality. How can we link the duality, wave and particle, to the physical world? Well, according to the Copenhagen interpretation, simply observation does it. It turns a wave function, which is spread across the universe, or taking it further, the multiverse, into a localized phenomena, which we can call a particle, which can be observed by mechanisms from the macroscopic world. Similarly, the architect of humans would act in the same way, where the wave and the particle version of the total quantum wave function observed by the observer. And remember, Sinclair's alluding to information loss being the cause of aging. This observer would have the perfect blueprint for us to keep us young forever. It's a fucking good idea. Whoop. And by eye to the eye, bringing the two together, we can then produce real number effects. So the observer can be seen to be simply bringing the particle and the wave together. An act of consummation. Now, if we look at general relativity, we've got Kaluza in 1926 brought in light. So he linked gravity with electromagnetism, which is a must because with the Higgs mechanism, to produce mass from massless physical equations, every equation in physics has no mass and is simply matrix. So Higgs in the 1950s brought in a theory to bring mass into physics, which involves light. So we know that general relativity, by definition, which mass causes, the space-time to be distorted to produce gravity, is wrong, because the Higgs mechanism, which produces mass, needs light, electromagnetism. So Kaluza's theory of general relativity, which is five-dimensional general relativity, and I don't apologise for bringing in stuff you never come across, because these are the kindergarten ABC of understanding how biological systems work. So it's no point talking sub-kindergarten because you won't get anywhere. So Kaluza's five-dimensional general relativity is the starting point for our kindergarten description of the observer that has the epigenetics and the cell signal transduction and the RNAi to use what's available, the building blocks, the building materials to build a building. And from the quantum mechanical realm, which I posit particle is three space, wave is a three space. So we're into complex number space. We can add I to the I to make physical number space stuff in the so-called real world, which isn't real at all because it's simply made from the quantum mechanical world. It is simply a representation. Then of course we can take the particle and wave apart and delete from the physical world. Giving us simply add, take away, which allows us with the blueprint, add bits, take away bits, to build what we want. Now, how do we link this to general relativity, which we know we need to encompass in 5 dimensions to even begin to describe what's going on? So with the informational theory of aging, which David Sinclair and his Harvard team have posited, since they're not physicists, they would have no idea how to even begin. Physicists would have no idea how to begin because they can't link quantum mechanics with general relativity. But let's have a go. Think of a quantum mechanical, total quantum wave function of a human. Has a wave and a particle. Similarly, in its 5D representation, we don't need to have the wave first, we can have the particle first. So wave, particle, particle, wave are not the same because they're non-abelian. AB does not equal BA in non-abelian mathematics. I don't apologise for non-hard scientists not understanding what abelian is, because that's the way it is. There are only a certain number of people who can understand the actual workings. But be that as it may, that means that the quantum wave function, the total quantum wave function of a human, which has the observer, which David Sinclair talks about as being able to correct the information flow. And there must be an observer which is 5-dimensional. Sorry, you lost me. What? Pardon? What's going on here? No, it's quite simple. Baby grows up, finds love of its life, or someone to fuck, various spectrum, has sex, has baby, produces baby, finds love of its life or something to fuck, new baby. We're gender neutral here because it works for male and female. The question is though, with epigenetics, the epigenetic code that reads the blueprint of the building materials degrades with age. So how can we get a perfect blueprint, not the blueprint of the building materials, the DNA, but the blueprint to build a perfect baby, perfect building, which degrades? So your 30-year-old parents have got an epigenetic blueprint that is dysfunctional. They need the conceptual blueprint. So somewhere within them must be a blueprint that doesn't reside within their biological system, because they can produce a baby which has the optimal start from beginning blueprint, not in the DNA, because the DNA is simply the building blocks. The epigenome is what tells, what bits to. So my theory is that each male and female has a total quantum wave function. No physicist would disagree with me, because it's true, according to physics. And within the total quantum wave function is the master blueprint for the epigenetics, which then controls all the massively complex functions within cell biology, which we'll go into in passing, because if we went into them in detail, we'd do 1,000 videos. Really, well, if you want to fill up videos, just go through all cell biology. And if you don't believe me, look at Rhonda Patrick talking to David Sinclair video on YouTube and you'll go, fuck, that's the most informationally dense video I've ever seen in my life. Holy fuck. So let's look at this new theory of the information which underlies biological systems. So you've got a wave and a particle, and the observer, and the particle and the wave, and the observer. And in Theodore Kaluza's general relativity in 5 dimensions, you've got a 10 tensor, which is actually a 20 tensor, but that's another story, which describes mass warping space-time to produce gravity. And since mass, according to the Higgs mechanism, comes from Higgs particle, Higgs boson, light in the Kaluza theory is gravity in the 5th dimension. We must have 5-dimensional general relativity to even start. So Einstein's general relativity is wrong if general relativity and the Higgs mechanism, both theories which physicists agree in, are right. So Kaluza was right. General relativity by Einstein in 4 dimensions wrong. Must be general relativity in 5 dimensions, because we don't get mass unless we bring in light, and unless we link light with general relativity, which is what Kaluza did, we can't get mass, and if we can't get mass, we can't get general relativity. I don't apologise for non-physicists not understanding a word I'm talking about, because that's irrelevant. I'm just explaining that we have an underlying basis for the master blueprint of humans. I'll explain why. Because in Theodore Kaluza's theory, we then have a 4 vector which describes electromagnetism, which is gravity in the 5th dimension, which links up with the Higgs mechanism. Higgs mechanism, Higgs particle, Higgs boson, light, join together, produce mass. And doing that, he found out, we get scalar. A scalar field is something with magnitude but not direction, like temperature. And we can get it's positive, where it's space-like, or negative, where it's time-like. Now, going back to Russian research, we had bioplasm. They found an energy field from the cell surface, which they could find on Chilean photography. They found another energy field from the nucleus, which they called soul fluid. This was during the Cold War times. You can imagine they had sophisticated sensors, which the West doesn't have. I was lucky enough to contact one of their chief scientists, who purported to be the deputy of their psychic warfare program under Andropov. But he's named in the Martin Ebon book, and seems his story is true. So, from Kaluza, how do we explain bioplasm and soul fluid? Well, it's a scalar. The bioplasm is the space-like scalar, which is positive. The soul fluid is the time-like scalar, which is negative. Putting it in simple layman's language, think of it as the life force. One is positive, one is negative, one is the life force you display when you're awake. The other one is the life force you display when you're asleep and dreaming. Now, from the quantum world, we know we can have particle, wave, wave, particle to produce our standing wave. The standing wave, the quantum wave, by I to the I, then produces the real world, which would produce the equations of general relativity, uniting quantum mechanics and general relativity, which is the holy grail of physics, which no physicist can do. And in the quantum realm, I minus I, particle wave, wave particle, produce the standing wave. So you've got 4 components. AB does not equal BA. 4. Which would then link up in Kaluza's theory with the 4 vector, which is the basis of electromagnetism. Which produces light. And according to the Higgs mechanism, the Higgs boson merges I to the I with light to start the process, and then merges I to the I with the Higgs particle to produce mass, and the Higgs boson then appears along one of the 4 vectors of light in the 4th dimension, where the Higgs particle has lost some mass, and the Higgs boson, which is massless, has developed some mass, but only exists as along one of the 4 vectors of light. I'm not going to go into all the physics, because unless you're a professional, you won't understand. Simply put, though, the observer can be equated to the Higgs boson. The particle and wave, or the wave and particle, can be equated to light. So in general relativity, our 4 vector, which to become massive has to have the Higgs mechanism, has to merge with light, and in Kaluza, gravity in the 5th dimension is light. So our 4 vector describes light, but in the Kaluza theory we haven't brought in the Higgs mechanism from 1950s, so the Higgs boson is along one of the 4 vectors. Which means that if this is the master blueprint for building it, we would then have to have mechanisms within the DNA to use this master blueprint. Particle, wave, wave, particles, quaternary. So the blueprint DNA would have to be quaternary. We'd have to have 4 different bits on our DNA. Oh, but we do. Cysteine, guanine, thymine, adenine. Wow, that's revelatory. So the DNA has only 4 different ribonucleotides. It's quaternary, which could link up with our quantum field. Oh my goodness. Isn't that a coincidence? Now, of course, if we're linking in the Higgs particle to make it massive, one of those 4 would have the observer, would have the Higgs boson, would have the thing that controls the epigenetics. Ooh, strange. One of them, cysteine, is methylated, which then controls the basic epigenetic blueprint. It is the master switch for deciding which cells are, which cells aren't. It's done in the blastocyst after conception and decides permanently which cells are which. Strangely enough, the methyl group, C, with H bits coming out, is 4 again. And then to allow the defined cells, which are done by methylation of the cysteines on the DNA, to be varied depending upon environment and growth, we have something called histones, H4, H3, H2B, H2A, 4 of them, which then link with another 4 histones to make 8 of them, around which we get 146 of these DNA ribonucleotides, which can be unspooled or spooled together to then change what bits of the DNA we read on the defined DNA done by the methyl groups. So one can see that the quantum mechanical blueprint, which controls epigenetics, which controls what's available from the DNA, is a goer, and that the observer in the quantum realm was linked up with the Higgs boson, and shamans call it the assemblage point. So there's little observer assemblage points in the DNA which correspond to the methyl groups on the cysteine. And as time goes on, the methyl groups, more methylation. So have a look clock, how old you are. Do a test on you, and the more methyl groups you got in your DNA, the older you are. Because you get more of this shit appearing because you've got informational breakdown. But the informational breakdown is coming from the total quantum wave function, which is losing coherence with its physical manifestation. But we know it can be rebooted because you can have children. When you have children, the perfect blueprint is still in the total quantum mechanical wave function of the parents, and can then be downloaded into the egg and the sperm with the perfect blueprint to control the epigenetics, to control the building blocks, DNA, to make a new baby. Now, wouldn't it be a good idea? It's just a thought. If one could hijack this baby making process, where we've got the perfect blueprint still residing within the male and the female. So instead of having babies, we fool the system into thinking we're having a baby. but the baby's us. So the perfect blueprint for bringing us back to zero cell age can be put back into the biological system from the quantum mechanical world. And Angelic Annie's friends with someone who's got machines where you can actually test, and you can actually test the quantum age of your body using the machine. And this technology can lower your quantum age back to zero again, where instead of the blueprint being exported to your babies, it can be imported into you to start you de-aging to become young again. And people like David Sinclair and all the researchers in gerontology would agree that there must be a blueprint which decays informational decay, which controls the epigenetics, which must be perfect for the concepted egg, so must reside somewhere within the organism, but is not available to the rapidly aging organism. But with psychic warfare, one can dig it out and reproduce it in you. Now, going to bioplasm and soul fluid. Bioplasm is space-like, the scale is positive. So eye to the eye is going to be adding. So cell receptors, things come in. So cells move towards food sources, good stuff. The bioplasm, time-like, negative sign on the scalar. So the eye to the eye is going to be negative, deleting. So the energy in the nucleus deletes. Oh my goodness, that's exactly what happens in the nucleus. Most of the DNA is shut down. So the metal groups are controlled by the soul fluid. And the bioplasm, which is the cell signal transduction, making the cells grow, in their morphogenetically defined state, is done by bioplasm. But throughout life, like a battery, bioplasm, soul fluid, runs down. But what if you got into vampire technology, where you could suck up soul fluid? If you're a vegan from plants, if like me, from any fucker that comes around you. And bioplasm. Then, of course, you'd be able to use your archetypal blueprint, which is only available for the egg and the sperm, because you've run out of so much energy by the time you have sex to conceive, that you can only do it for simple cells instead of the whole organism. But what happens if you can suck in loads of bioplasm, loads of soul fluid, bioplasm adds to you to make you bigger, soul fluid deletes all the tags which make you old. So soul fluid could make you immortal. Oh my goodness. If we had mechanisms to do this, like psychotronic generators and psychic warfare technology, the Russians were into psychic generators to collect psychic energy, we'd have a road to the archetypal blueprint to virtually make ourselves immortal. Now, wouldn't that be a new world.